Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. This is the 2021 Tour de France Jumbo-Visma team breakdown. Now, Jumbo-Visma put on a show last year in the 2020 Tour de France and just dominated throughout the Tour de France all the way to stage 20 time trial when Tadej Pogačar destroyed everybody and won the Tour de France. Now, this is what's really strange about sports. Had last year been canceled on after stage 19 and we never got to the time trial, everybody in the world would just assume Primož Roglič won the Tour de France and Jumbo-Visma were the team to beat just because they dominated so much. Now you throw in that one little bitty time trial and Tadej Pogačar all of a sudden is the favorite for this year's Tour de France instead of Primož Roglič. When you compare the teams from UAE Team Emirates, Jumbo-Visma have a much stronger depth of team. They can climb better. They have stronger guys for the flats. They can just dominate races all over the place. And they have two sprinters. Now that's pretty crazy because Mike Teunissen is on the squad for 2021. He won stage 1 of the 2019 Tour de France and wore the race leader's jersey. That year they were really strong, but Team Ineos, Sky, they were stronger and of course won with Egan Bernal in 2019. But with Jumbo-Visma coming with two sprinters, Mike Teunissen and Wout van Aert, it adds a little different chemistry in the mix for the teams. We saw last year they're capable of winning not one but two stages with Wout van Aert. This year they're bringing them again. And when you look at stage 1 and stage 2 with those slight uphill finishes, Wout van Aert could easily be a favorite to be wearing the yellow jersey after stage 1 or after stage 2 or after stage 5 at the time trial. It's not that far-fetched to think Wout van Aert with time bonuses and the way he time trials at stage 5, he could be wearing race leader's jersey at the Tour de France. Primož Roglič might not even be in yellow when we finish the stage 5 at the Tour de France with the time trial. So there's some strange chemistry when you look at the team. Now here's what's different between that team and Ineos. Ineos we talked about yesterday, they have 4 leaders. With Jumbo-Visma, Primož Roglič is their only leader. And it's kind of strange to look at it that way because he hasn't raced his bike since Liège-Bastogne-Liège. So it's been a couple months and he's been at home training. Now personally, when I've done the Tour de France, I have arrived to the Tour de France without any race days, where my last event was held at the Tour of California. No race days, went into the Tour de France with fabulous form and crashed and knocked myself out after the first week of racing. Now I was sitting top 10, 11th or 12th right in that area when I crashed out and then went home from the Tour de France. But I can tell you honestly, the form was fabulous and I went in there with great fitness without any racing before that. Now I've done it at the Tour de France where I've raced Dauphiné before the Tour de France, and I've done it where I've raced Tour of Swiss before the Tour de France. And I've done it the way that Tadej Pogačar did it, where I raced Tour of Slovenia and then arrived at the Tour de France. I did that in 2014 when I raced with Lamprey. Every time I was able to arrive at the Tour de France with good form. So I'm not worried about Primož Roglič not racing at all. I know commentators and especially the riders, the cycling riders out there, they're all worried about coming into the Tour de France with no racing, but there is no reason to worry. Primož Roglič is a professional rider. He's already shown that he can start races without race days and be solid. My only concern about Primož Roglič is stage 1 looks very difficult. I liked it much better if I arrived from my house in San Diego or Bend, Oregon and arrived to Europe and I could at least get one day that was more flat and could be a little bit calm versus what we might experience on stage 1 and 2 of this year's 2021 Tour de France. So there's a smidge of doubt in my mind if Primož will be really sharp on that stage 1 and possibly stage 2 of this year's Tour de France. But in general, once he gets past stage 1 and 2 of the Tour de France, all those little smidges of doubt that I have about his form will be erased. And then I believe he'll be even fresher and ready to be fantastic when we start talking about week 2 and week 3. Remember, with Primož Roglič, week 3, especially the final mountain stages, have always given him complications. You look at last year's Vuelta win when he won in 2020. It was the last mountain stage where Carapaz really put the sword to the boy. Had he not had some help from Movistar, it's possible he would have lost the 2020 Vuelta on the last mountain stage. You go back to last year's Tour de France, and we all know Tadej Pogačar did beat him in the time trial. Now, Primož Roglic's time trial at last year's Tour de France was not at his normal ability. He was a little bit off, not catastrophically off. I mean, he was still fifth on the stage, if I remember correctly, but I'd say probably about 30 seconds off. Tadej Pogačar, a brilliant time trial where he even added 30 seconds or a minute to what we all thought he was capable of doing, and so he dominated and won the Tour de France. Now, those are the question marks over Primož Roglic. With his team, it's fabulous. The difference from this year and last year, George Bennett's no longer here, but they're replacing him with Steven Kruijswijk. Steven Kruijswijk hasn't been as sharp as what we saw years past, and the American Flying Eagle, Sepp Kuss, hasn't been as sharp as we've seen him in years past either. Now with Sepp, I'm not too worried about, because I know from Sepp's style and from his character, if he's not going to get the win like we saw at Dauphiné, he'll just sit up and give that time away. He doesn't care about finishing 9th or 8th or 10th or something like that. You're not going to see him sprinting for 15th spot on the stage. So when he sat up during Dauphiné and he lost that stage to Marc Padun, I'm not worried about how he looks for this Tour de France. He was still there at the very end, all the way till 5K to go. When we look at Sepp Kuss at the Tour de France, he doesn't necessarily have to be with Primož Roglic with 2K, 3K, and 4K to go to the summit finish. What we'll need Sepp Kuss for is when you have to go over the summit and down the finish. When you're talking about the Ventoux stage, they have multiple mountain stages where we'll go up to the top, and then the finish will be at the bottom of the mountain stage instead of at the summit. Those are days when Primož Roglic will need one of his mountain domestiques to go over the top with him, so you can control the pace on the descent and not get attacked by 5 guys left and right as the speed slows and then accelerates again. So he does need teammates with him to go over the top of the last climb, but you don't need teammates to go to the summit of the last climb. There's a big difference between that. So Sepp Kuss's form, Steven Kruijswijk's form, it looks very good and solid for this Tour de France. 1% better than what we saw at Dauphiné, and they will be an amazing team and head and shoulders, I believe, over Team Ineos. When we talk about Team Ineos, everyone said they are the most dominant team here, but Jumbo-Visma have easily a squad the same quality, if not better, because you have the Wout van Aert card. Now, Wout is amazing. We've seen last year he can ride the flats. He can win sprints against the best sprinters in the world. Flat out beat Sam Bennett. Caleb Ewan last year on flat finishes to the line was absolutely amazing. In the crosswind sections, nobody does it better. Now you throw in Tony Martin on the flat stages. The German rider just got done winning the German National Time Trial Championship, so you know his legs are good, and he hasn't had a whole lot of racing from an injury that he got, I believe it was in Paris-Nice, if I remember correctly. So he's coming into the Tour de France fresh. We know he's on form by winning the German National Time Trial Championships. Mike Teunissen, big, strong, powerful guy that can sprint, so you know he's good on the flats, and Wout van Aert's fabulous on the flats too. Ineos have a stacked team. So with those 3 guys on the flats, and then with their mountain domestiques in the climbs, Primož Roglic has everything he needs to win this Tour de France if his legs are good. The only question mark at all is whether or not if he can beat Tadej Pogačar. Now, Tadej Pogačar will be his biggest number 1 rival at this year's Tour de France. And look, for many times when we get in the mountain stages, if Ineos is really attacking with multiple numbers on these climbs, and let's say Sepp Kuss, Steven Kruijswijk, Jonas Vingegaard aren't on fabulous form like we've seen them in years past, if their form's a little bit off and they were to get dropped by the Ineos boys, then look for a little combination with the 2 Slovenians. They speak the same language. They know each other. It's easy for them to talk right away and decide to make a deal so that they work together to bring back Ineos boys. UAE Team Emirates have a decent team and could be an exceptional team if all their guys are firing on the right cylinders. But, of course, they don't have that same kind of stacked team that we see from Ineos and, of course, from Jumbo-Visma. In my opinion, the biggest thing holding back Jumbo-Visma, they have bad tactics. Every year I've watched them race the last 2-3 seasons, their tactics are horrendous. Last year's Tour de France, stage 18, when they went over the gravel roads, it was a spectacular stage. I recommend watching it. But when they went over the gravel roads, it was Primož Roglic on the front, race leader jersey at the Tour de France, driving the pace and dropping all his teammates. We saw Sepp Kuss get dropped and was trying to close back on, and Primoz Roglic is not waiting for him. Absolutely horrendous tactic to leave one of your teammates behind that could easily get back on and help. Behind Sepp Kuss, you had Wout van Aert back there chasing and Tom Dumoulin chasing. Luckily for Richie Porte, they were chasing because Richie had flatted on that gravel section. Those two riders with Wout van Aert and Tom Dumoulin had picked up Richie Porte and brought him back to the race leader, Primoz Roglic. In my mind, in my book, absolutely zero reason for Primoz Roglic to have been pushing that pace, and the directors in the car should have told him, hey, you have teammates behind, sit up and wait. Many times when I was racing for Cadel Evans, I would be just off the back over one of the climbs, and I would get on the radio immediately and tell Cadel, hey, I'm just behind, don't do any work, I'll be there in 5 minutes. He'd back off, I'd latch back on straight to the front and start doing work. That happened at Tour of Romandy one year. Cadel Evans went on to win Tour of Romandy and signed a marvelous contract right after that win. So, in my opinion, their only real weakness with Team Jumbo-Visma are their tactics are just absolutely horrendous. Now, the reason why they win so much, when you have the best legs, when you have the #1 rider in the world, when you have one of the strongest teams in the world backing you up, you can make mistakes all over the place. You can recover from those mistakes and still win. But they are mistakes and they need to be pointed out, and they will be costly at some point in time. When Tadej Pogačar is so even with Primoz Roglic, you can't afford those mistakes near the end of the race because you won't have a Wout van Aert, a Tony Martin, a Sepp Kuss to come back and make up for that mistake if you leave a gap that Tadej Pogačar is able to jump away. Now, Primoz Roglic, as we saw at the Basque Country, is getting smarter and a little cagier. We saw stage 6 when he immediately made a deal with the FDJ rider, Davide Gaudu, and with EF Education's Hugh Carthy, and said, hey, I'm not going to win this stage. You guys can have the stage. Just work with me and I'll give you the stage win. I'll give you a chance at the stage win and I won't sprint. That was fabulous, and that shows the experience where Primoz Roglic is starting to become a little wiser as he gets further into his racing years. And at this Tour de France, he may need a little bit of deal making back there to keep Tadej Pogačar and the Ineos train in check and keep everything lined up for his Jumbo-Visma boys to do a great job and chauffeur him all the way to the final climbs of these Tour de France's and into the time trial with a chance at winning the Tour de France. 2 time trials though, remember, and Tadej Pogačar was fast at last year's Tour de France. If he can do it again, that means Primoz Roglic will need to drop the young Slovenian friend on the summit finishes, or he's going to lose the Tour de France again in the time trial stages. Should be an exciting watch, and again, a fabulous 2021 Tour de France coming. Hope you guys like my take on Jumbo-Visma at the 2021 Tour de France, and I'll see you guys real soon on the next edition of Beyond the Coverage.